January 3, 1994 Observer Newsletter. Flair beats Vader at Starrcade 93. Huge career rundown. Tons more by Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter, P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228. January 3, 1994. Ric Flair's 11th, or 10th, or 12th, depending on what you consider a world title and what you're willing to accept and ignore when it comes to wrestling history, world title victory was easily the most memorable of all his title wins, and created a unique emotional moment almost foreign to American wrestling. In what was easily the best job of build-up for a single match in the 5-year history of WCW, Starrcade 93, by virtue of a horrible situation that took place 2 months earlier in England, was switched from the planned Vader losing the WCW title to Sid Vicious, to Vader losing the title to Flair in a match where Flair put his career on the line. The result was what was announced as a sellout at the Charlotte Independence Arena, actually about 300 shy of capacity, probably with less papering than at any recent WCW major shows. The report we got was the house was $65,000, which is more than any WCW house in a long time, but still indicates they needed significant paper to fill the building even with all the hype nationally and in the local media because Flair is a major celebrity in town and friends with key writers and sportscasters. Most likely it also resulted in as good a pay-per-view buy rate as WCW could be capable of getting at this stage or any stage in the foreseeable future, although based on our response as far as numbers of calls, it doesn't indicate the 0.8 that some people were hoping for. But in fairness to the company, once they were forced into changing the main event, they did everything possible to not only make it work, but did a unique promotional job using the media and pushing Flair like never before. Ironically, just days before the event, something happened in the build-up that just a few years earlier would have been regarded as an absolute disaster, but in today's wrestling world was almost not even worthy of a notice. In a snafu the likes that seems to happen with alarming regularly with the company, a pay-per-view ad that ran 1 week before the show in the trade magazine Multi-Channel News featured an ad not for Starrcade, but for Super Brawl February 20, 1994, listing the main event as Flair defending the title against Vader in a Thunder Cage match. Ad slicks for that match had been sent to cable companies around the country well beforehand, so anyone within the cable industry with any interest in wrestling knew the result, but then again, any fan with a brain should have been able to easily figure it out as well. But the topper was 3 days later when the New York Daily News, which is I believe the largest circulated daily newspaper in the country, showed the ad for Super Brawl mentioning the snafu with the headline, "You can bet on it," saying the ad gave away that Flair was going to win the title 4 days later and said if you need some extra holiday cash, bet the ranch on Flair, if you can find someone to take the bet. Ironically, or perhaps not, the same newspaper ran a lengthy story on Flair the day before, treating Flair and pro wrestling as if it were a shoot. In addition, the ads in local newspaper TV guides around the country for the show were still listing Vader defending against Vicious as the main event. If this was just 1 year ago and Bill Watts was still in charge of WCW, he'd have pulled out what little hair he had left, torn apart several sections of the office, and probably have to be heavily sedated in order to keep from changing the finish. But it's 1 year later and nobody cared, and quite frankly, I doubt if affected the number of buys for this show one iota. In the weeks leading up to the show, Flair delivered some of the best interviews of the decade, and WCW backed it up by getting footage of other sports stars, most notably Charles Barkley, plugging the match and building up Flair. The television, while giving some build-up to other matches, focused on the main event in a manner telling everyone that this match was not the typical pay-per-view main event, thus making it not a typical pay-per-view show, and effectively got the match and thus the show over as an extra special event. The show itself, sold as a one-match show, delivered because of that. There were no expectations for the undercard, which was fortunate, because nothing underneath delivered. Because of that, it was a $24.95 pay-per-view show with only one good match out of 8, but was still a solid, in fact a major, thumbs up. The undercard was made a backdrop for hyping the main event, similar to a boxing pay-per-view. While the unique setting and uniqueness of the hype is something that neither WWF nor WCW could possibly duplicate more than once every few years, if even that, because how many enduring figures will this business produce that reach the level of Flair, let alone how many are capable of putting on the performance that created this emotion? Other aspects of building drama, showing the guys entering the arena, interviews with the main eventers interspersed throughout the card rather than just immediately before the match. For the main event to make it seem special could be done for the world title match on most pay-per-view shows effectively. Once a year, for the big match, they could even build interest by having interviews with the other leading wrestling personalities in the group analyzing and predicting a winner. In this case, having the other faces and heels both talk about Flair and his legacy would have been a nice added touch. At this pay-per-view, the maudlin approach to what could have been Flair's final match ever at one point bordered on being overdone. The show opened with a series of photos of Flair from early childhood through what appeared to be college football, a newspaper clipping of the 1975 small airplane crash that he was in with Johnny Valentine and Bob Bruggers, both of whom never wrestled again, and some others where he broke his back, and then showed clips of him in the ring from previous Starrcade main events. They aired a clip of Vader arriving in the building and working out in the ring hours before the show started. They then went to Flair's house showing Flair, wife Beth and 3 of his 4 children in an emotional setting trying to get over the idea that this really could be his last ride to his final match. Flair was then shown getting into a limo with Gene Okerlund and they talked in a manner leading you to believe it was going to be his last match. After the opener, they showed another clip of them riding to the building with more last match talk. At this point it bordered on being overdone, and finally showed them arriving at the building. The match itself was excellent when it came to drama and heat, largely because of the Charlotte crowd/hometown Flair tie-in and the build-up. It would have been a great match in any case, but not one that would be remembered for years. The match never had the heart-stopping close calls that made nearly every nightly Flair match during the mid-'80s, nor did it have the brutality that Vader's pay-per-view matches with Sting or Cactus Jack had or the level of heat and action of every Big Show Kenta Kobashi match this year. But as a total performance, and by that I don't mean bell-to-bell performance but pre-match build-up to post-match interview performance, it probably was both the best and most memorable of Flair's entire career. This was also a night where Gene Okerlund to a lesser extent got over this as something special because he tried to act largely out of character, and a main event where Tony Schiavone did the best announcing job of his career. Whether this was the last real hurrah or a career rebirth, either for WCW and or Ric Flair, will be answered by crowd reactions over the next few weeks. But no matter which it is and what the future of WCW is, Flair's role in wrestling history as its greatest all-around performer of all time, which was solidified many years ago, was defined on this night. It was the night where his versatility, interviewability, and obvious love for his sport took center stage above any wrestling match. If it seemed real at times, it probably was because, with the exception of what actually went on in the ring, which was really brutal in its own right, an awful lot of it was. Ric Flair's career rundown. Real name, Richard Morgan Flair. Birthday, February 25, 1949. Years pro, 21. Total championship reigns, NWA World Heavyweight title, between 8 and 10 depending on how you figure it. Most ever in history. WCW World Heavyweight title, 2 concurrent with NWA title reign. WWF World Heavyweight title, 2, United States Heavyweight title, 5 tied with Wahoo McDaniel for most in history of that version of the U.S. title. NWA World Tag Team title, 3. Mid-Atlantic title, 2. Mid-Atlantic Tag Team title, 2. Mid-Atlantic TV title, 2. Missouri State title, 1. Wrestling Observer Newsletter Readers Awards, Wrestler of the Year, 1981, 1982, 1983, 1984, 1985, 1986, 1989, 1990, 1,992 since 1981. No wrestler in North America has ever finished ahead of Flair in Wrestler of the Year balloting. Most Outstanding Wrestler, 1986, 1987, 1989, Best Heel, 1990, Feud of the Year, 1989 versus Terry Funk. Most Charismatic, 1980, 1982, Match of the Year, 1983 versus Harley Race, 1986 versus Barry Windham, 1988 versus Sting, 1989 versus Rick Steamboat, Reader's Favorite Wrestler, 1984, 1985, 1986, 1987, 1988. 1989, 1990, 1991, 1992, Wrestler of the Decade, 1980s, 1967, Minnesota High School State Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, 1969-70, played offensive guard at University of Minnesota, 1971, attended Vern Gagne's training camp in Minnesota, but dropped out, 1972, attended camp a second time, finishing, and made his pro debut on December 10, 1972, going to a draw with the late George Scrap Iron Godosky. 1973, wrestled as undercard rookie in the AWA, mostly putting over another rookie, Greg Gonya. 1974, on the recommendation of Wahoo McDaniel, was brought in by Carolina's promoter Jim Crockett Jr. as a typical at the time cocky bleached blonde heel to be tag team partner with veteran Rip Hawk. Captured first championship, the old Mid-Atlantic Tag Team titles with Hawk beating Paul Jones and Bob Bruggers. Lost titles to Jones and Tiger Conway Jr. in early 1975. 1975, captured first singles title, the Mid-Atlantic TV title from Paul Jones, was out of action for several months after suffering a broken back in a small airplane crash, returned to team with Greg Valentine to win the Mid-Atlantic tag titles from Dino Bravo and Conway, the first of many tag titles held with Valentine. 1976 captured the Mid-Atlantic title for the first time from Wahoo McDaniel, beginning his most famous early career singles feud that lasted on and off for nearly 10 years. By this time Flair was being considered by many as a future world champion when the NWO was a worldwide conglomerate and its title was considered the #1 title in the wrestling world. Some members of the NWA board, which was in charge of deciding who the group's standard bearer would be, began bringing up Flair's name as a possible successor to then-champion Terry Funk. 1977, although Flair captured numerous titles in the Mid-Atlantic region and established himself as the top wrestler in a talent-laden organization, this was the year of his first major disappointment. The NWA board decided to go with Harley Race, who had more international experience and more of an international name, to replace Funk as champion rather than Flair. Flair held the Mid-Atlantic TV title a second time, gaining it from Rufus Jones, won the U.S. title for the first time from Bobo Brazil, and captured the old NWA Tag Team title belts twice, both times from Gene and Ole Anderson in a Hill vs. Hill feud. 1978, the legendary Ric Flair vs. Rick Steamboat feud started in an angle where unknown newcomer Steamboat pinned Flair in a television match. During this year an angle was run where Flair came out with two models and taunted Steamboat, and an enraged Steamboat came out and ripped Flair's clothes off and left him in his underwear. Ironically, one of the two models in the angle was the future Bonnie Steamboat Blood, although it was many years later before the two met again. Steamboat and Flair headlined throughout the year, with Steamboat winning both the U.S. title and Mid-Atlantic TV titles from Flair during this period. By August, Flair had regained the U.S. title for a second time, winning it from Tim Woods, but Steamboat regained the title in December. Right about this time, Channel 17 in Atlanta, then known as WTCG, started getting on satellite systems, and Flair occasionally worked in Georgia on major Friday night cards, and would frequently stay over for the Saturday morning television tapings, which would in those days air that evening, and began to make a name for himself outside of the Carolinas/Virginia and Ontario/Buffalo, New York area, which in those days ran the Mid-Atlantic television show and used Crockett wrestlers as its headliners, and St. Louis, which was the NWA headquarters. Although Flair actually debuted in Japan as a rookie for the old Eway in 1973, his first tour as a star for All Japan was in April and May, where he gained what at the time was a rare pinfall win over Giant Baba, making him an instant star. 1979, Flair turned full-fledged babyface shortly after regaining the U.S. title from Steamboat, and became undisputedly the top star in the promotion, after being turned on by Gene Anderson's stable, which included Jimmy Snuka, Iron Sheik, and Greg Valentine. Flair dropped the title to Snuka, but shortly thereafter gained the World Tag title with Blackjack Mulligan as his partner, winning and losing the titles in a feud with Paul Jones and Baron von Raschke. With the growing expansion of cable and more systems carrying Channel 17 out of Atlanta, Flair was seen on a national basis. 1980, continuing as a babyface, Flair worked mainly on top in U.S. title matches, first feuding with Snuka. After regaining the title for the fourth time on April 19 in Greensboro, his feud switched to Greg Valentine. Valentine won the title in July, before Flair regained it on Thanksgiving weekend in Charlotte, and immediately started feuding with the first wrestler who could give his mouth more than a run for its money, Roddy Piper. The Piper-Flair feud in those days was far more memorable for the interview confrontations going back and forth than the matches themselves. Flair continued to work in Georgia. 1981, on September 17, Flair captured the NWA title for the first time from Dusty Rhodes in Kansas City. He immediately became one of the most traveled champions in its history, going from circuit to circuit, mainly as a heel facing each promotion's top babyface, but remaining as a babyface in the Carolinas, but also facing babyfaces as well as heels in title defenses. At this point, Georgia Championship Wrestling had peaked in the TV ratings, averaging a weekly 6.6 every Saturday afternoon, making it the most watched show on cable television. 1982, Flair's matches with the Von Erichs began in Texas, with an August match with Kerry at Reunion Arena being the roots of a rebirth of the Dallas territory. His December 25, 1982 match with Kerry, which drew the first $100,000 gate in the history of Texas wrestling, literally set the stage for the biggest wrestling boom that part of the country had ever seen. Over the next 3 years, Flair's matches with Kerry not only sold out numerous shows in Texas, but also in as far away places as Hawaii, Japan, and drew big crowds in the Mid-South territory. By this point in time, with the exception of Hulk Hogan, who was a regional drawing card in the Midwest, Flair was the biggest drawing card in North America. 1983, Flair lost the title for the first time on June 10 in St. Louis to Harley Race, largely to set up the first Starrcade on November 24 in Greensboro, which drew a sellout 16,000 fans and drew an additional 30,000 more in a dozen closed-circuit sites. Billed as a Flair for the Gold, Flair vowed he would retire from wrestling if he failed to win the title in a cage match against Race, the same vow that drew WCW's most interest in a main event 10 years later. While closed circuit was used in the early 70s during the heyday of Mil Mascaras in Los Angeles, several theaters were booked for closed circuit telecasts of the sold-out Olympic Auditorium matches, and later the Felt Forum, now Paramount, was used numerous times during a hot feud at Madison Square Garden. This was the most ambitious wrestling promotion since the Muhammad Ali-Antonio Inoki fiasco in 1976. The total overall gate for the show, including closed circuit, was $650,000. Which pales by comparison with the megagates of today, but it was more than any show except Ali Inoki had ever done in the history of U.S. wrestling. Flair also drew baseball stadium crowds in excess of 30,000 fans for matches in Puerto Rico and Santo Domingo against the likes of Victor Jovica and Carlitos Colon. 1984. In the Forgotten World title change, Flair dropped the strap on March 21 in Wellington, New Zealand to Race, and regained it on March 23 in Kowloon, Singapore. All the wrestlers on the tour were sworn to secrecy because nobody in the US or Japan was supposed to know about the title change. However, a Japanese publication reported it, and for years it was recognized in Japan as a title change, although it was later erased from that country's NWA title history. It was never acknowledged in the United States. On May 6, Flair dropped the title to Kerry Von Erich at Texas Stadium before 32,123 fans, paying $402,000, at that time the second highest single event gate in North American wrestling history, trailing only the Sammartino vs. Zbyszko Shea Stadium match in 1980. Flair regained the title from Kerry on May 24 in Yokosuka, Japan. The key event of this year was the media blitz the WWF received and its acquisition of the TBS time slot that made Flair a national name when McMahon bought out several partners in the old Georgia Championship Wrestling Incorporated company. After numerous complaints to TBS about the change, Ted Turner ordered an early Saturday morning show which a new Georgia group headed by Ole Anderson tried to hold together, and Flair still made as many tapings as his schedule would allow. 1985. The year of the first WrestleMania saw the media spotlight hit pro wrestling. Flair, in the wrong place, was usually ignored in all the stories or mentioned as a brief afterthought, even though he traveled throughout the U.S. and the world and remained one of the two biggest drawing cards in the country behind only Hogan. At the end of this year, Flair had been in the main event on 7 of the 10 largest gates in North American pro wrestling history. In April, Jim Crockett purchased the TBS time slot from Vince McMahon for a reported $1 million, who Ted Turner had ordered off the station, and immediately with the national vehicle, became the second most powerful promoter in the country, and set the stage for a national expansion that eventually killed a 50-year-old family sports promoting business. The first Great American Bash took place on July 4, selling out Charlotte Baseball Stadium to the tune of 30,000 fans as Flair beat Nikita Koloff in the main event. In a controversial move, Booker Dusty Rhodes turned Flair heel on Rhodes. At first there were numerous problems because even though they did a hot angle in Atlanta where Flair and what later became known as the Four Horsemen turned on Rhodes after a cage match where Flair and Rhodes had been partners, numerous fans wouldn't boo Flair, particularly in the home base. Still, no matter who was cheered or booed, Flair vs. Rhodes did $936,000 for the third Starrcade in their first grudge match after the angle, which was split between the Greensboro Coliseum and the Omni in Atlanta. What would have been a destroying of all previous records 1 year earlier actually paled in comparison to the several $1 million WWF took in at the first WrestleMania. 1986 Flair and Rhodes, often with the Road Warriors and Russians in the semifinals, drew huge business nearly everywhere Crockett Promotions ran. While the NWA smaller promotions started their downward slide, the NWA became more and more simply Jim Crockett Promotions. With Flair as his biggest draw, Crockett made it more and more difficult for other promotions to use Flair, and without access to the world champion and the money he brought in, the smaller promotions started dying out, although they inevitably would have only slightly slower anyway. Crockett himself started expanding and had a banner year. In another controversial move, Flair moved from being the centerpiece of the promotion to simply its top heel, as the Four Horsemen were formed, with Flair being part of a group. Flair dropped the title on July 26 in Greensboro to Dusty Rhodes, but regained it on August 9 in St. Louis, for title win number 4, by U.S. records, or 5. The final Starrcade ever at the Greensboro Coliseum, split with the Omni, plus the numerous closed circuit sites, drew $980,000 with Flair vs. Nikita Koloff on top, even at this late date, with WWF pretty well owning the media spotlight and the key major markets. 1987, the Crockett Machine began faltering this year by attempting to become a national promotion and spending far more than it took in. Much of the problem traced to buying out Bill Watts' Mid-South promotion and its 100-plus station syndicated network, many of which were deals that required the promotion to pay the station for airtime. When ad sales for that same airtime didn't come close to projections, and house shows started faltering, the company found itself in major financial trouble. With business on the downslide, the man on top, Flair, became a scapegoat in many's eyes. Flair's role as champion differed from most of the NWA champs of the past in that he rarely won his matches at the house shows after he became a heel everywhere, with Crockett using him on every show rather than him touring, among numerous reasons, and this wasn't the main one but an important one. Flair's new role killed business in the Crockett strongholds through what became known years later as dusty screw job finishes. Actually, this was hardly a dusty invention, and champs of the past used them frequently, but the champs of the past never appeared on every house show in a city, and in the past the screw jobs were used to set up return matches that would have conclusive finishes, thus the stories had a beginning, middle and end, and in the end the champion was the champion and hopefully the local star was protected enough that he'd still mean something. But it changed when the screw jobs simply led to more screw jobs and the champion never went over at the end. It was thought because of Flair's interviews that he was bulletproof from being hurt by these finishes, but the arena business started its collapse because that wasn't the case. Crockett's expenditures were such that his company couldn't handle the decreasing revenues from the house shows faltering. Flair dropped the title on September 25 in Detroit to Ron Garvin, a very tough, believable wrestler but one without a national main event reputation. Literally, Garvin wasn't even among the top 5 or 6 babyfaces in the promotion at this time, but he was the only one Booker Rhodes was willing to sacrifice to have to a clean job at Starrcade for Flair, thus was given the short title reign. Crockett literally banked the whole company on the windfall he felt Starrcade, this time on pay-per-view, marking the first NWA pay-per-view show ever, and only the 4th in history, would give him. The show was moved to Chicago because Greensboro didn't sound cosmopolitan enough. But Vince McMahon, coming off what would end up being his most show ever in WrestleMania 3, ran a counter pay-per-view event and flexed his muscles earned as the king of pay-per-view, saying no company that ran the Crockett event could run his event. With the WWF's track record, Starrcade was killed as only 5 companies in the entire country carried it, and thus was the beginning of the end for Jim Crockett Promotions. Flair regained the title in Cage to end a horrendous Starrcade in Chicago, where babyface Garvin was literally booed out of the building. 1988, as crowds continued to falter, the man at the top, Flair, started getting the rap of being stale, unable to draw, and old. Problems escalated with Booker Rhodes. Although Flair retained the title all year, it was not without its share of problems. One of his crowning moments came on March 27, which was Crockett's revenge for McMahon's killing his Starrcade. Crockett and TBS put together the first Clash of Champions from Greensboro, head-to-head with WrestleMania. While it's hard to ascertain just how many buys the free show cost WrestleMania, the losses of potential revenue to McMahon were probably in the millions. At the first Clash, Flair went to a 45-minute draw and retained his title against a young wrestler named Sting, who literally was just another young wrestler with a little popularity coming into the match, and came out of the match as the hottest new wrestling star in the country. The show, which drew a 5.6 rating, was the highest-rated wrestling show of the modern NWA/WCW era, a rating that likely will never be surpassed. With muscles and steroids in their height of prominence, it was Lex Luger that was being groomed as Flair's heir apparent, so Sting was quickly put on the back burner. All sorts of power plays were taking place at this time, as Flair and Luger did screw job finish after screw job finish, opening to the best houses the company did all year after the screw jobs with other opponents had killed most of the cities. In rapid order, the big gates plummeted dramatically when the lessons of the past weren't learned. For most of the summer it became well known that Crockett, in debt past his eardrums, would have to sell the company, and negotiations went on all year with Turner Broadcasting. In November, the deal was consummated for a reported $9 million price. Flair, Rhodes, and Crockett had numerous problems, ego clashes and what have you, as the crowds continually dropped and Rhodes constantly blamed the man on top and felt they needed a change. As it turned out, Flair nearly jumped to the WWF, as Tully Blanchard and Arnold Anderson had just a few months earlier. If that had happened, the wrestling world as we know it, for better or worse, would not exist. It is well known TBS was going to pull out of the deal without Flair, and Crockett couldn't have survived in business with all the losses as he was already in debt. At that point, McMahon was the closest he ever would be to having a true wrestling monopoly in the United States. Finally, irrationality took over. Rhodes booked a Starrcade where Flair would drop the title in 5 minutes to Rick Steiner, which caused Flair to walk out. When orders came from above that Starrcade would be headlined by Flair versus Lex Luger, with Flair getting an unheard-of pinfall victory, it was clear it was near the end for Rhodes, who was dumped as booker at the end of the year. 1989, at the age of 40, after being written off by some, Flair responded with what in many ways was the best year of his career, largely due to classic nationally televised matches against Rick Steamboat and Terry Funk. Flair dropped the strap to Steamboat on February 20th in Chicago in an all-time classic. The two followed it up with a 56-minute match in New Orleans, before Flair regained the title on May 7th in Nashville. Those three matches, and another in the Capitol Center, were widely touted as some of the greatest matches of the 1980s. Flair quickly segued into a feud with Funk, which resulted in the last $100,000 houses for regular house shows the promotion would ever see, and its highest buy rate in history, 1.5, another record that will never be surpassed, for the Great American Bash against Funk. At this point, with bookers having come and gone in rapid order, Flair did a power play of his own and demanded the book. Flair's booking reign was memorable for several reasons. First, television ratings increased to their highest level in years. While house show attendance wasn't strong, it was far higher than it would ever get again. The downside was that Ric Flair, world champion wrestler, began showing the strains on his face of being booker and world champion at the same time, and it even began showing in the ring. Even as perhaps his finest year as a pro was ending, he was being blamed more and more for the company's inability to draw, since he wore both hats as world champion and booker. Both Sting and Luger were mentioned as saviors of the company, which supposedly needed a young face on top to draw its lacking kids audience and sell merchandise and simply survive. 1990, the young face chosen by all was Sting, who was supposed to win the title in February in Greensboro. That was no problem since Flair himself was more than willing to put Sting over. Problems would have erupted afterwards since Booker Flair's plan was to eventually regain the title from Sting for the record-tying 7th time, while others in the company simply felt Flair's time at the top was over and there should be no number 7. Having passed the magical age of 40 was largely cited, plus WCW's inability to draw younger viewers was supposed to be somehow remedied by putting Sting, its top attraction with whatever limited number of kids watched, on top. However, 2 weeks before the match, Sting's knee was blown out doing an angle with Flair in Corpus Christi, Texas. Luger, then a heel, was turned emergency face to feud with Flair while Sting was on the mend. Flair, burned out by the constant infighting, just after delivering a weekend of 4.0 and 4.4 ratings on Saturday and Sunday, resigned as booker. Shortly thereafter, new booking committee and Jim Herd decided to put the title on Luger, which Flair refused to do, citing a controversial contractual clause which gave him veto power. When Sting came back on July 7th in Baltimore, he finally won the title from Flair, and at that point it was well known that it was the end of the Ric Flair era as champion, that there would be no record-tying number 7, and Sting gave Flair a send-off speech to a largely confused Baltimore audience by calling Flair the greatest champion in wrestling history. It was well known, except it wasn't the case, as some who understood what the business really was and what would happen knew beforehand. It was evident that no matter whose fault it was, that the promotion was doomed as a major force, since only 8,900 fans paid to see a match that by all means should have been an easy and automatic sellout if Sting really was going to be the answer. Sting's weaknesses showed through in the spotlight, as it was obvious they would when put under a microscope. Crowds and interest continued to fall despite the title change. This time it was Sting unfairly getting the blame. The company at this point was largely in a shambles, but still in a far stronger position than they would be in years later. 1991, sporting a new haircut, Flair regained the title for the record-tying 7th time on January 11th at the Meadowlands in New Jersey. At this point, the title's name changed from NWA to WCW. Sting's frustration was epitomized as he did little in the match that was memorable more for the snowstorm in New Jersey that night that kept the crowd to 5,000 than for anything that happened in the ring. Sting was largely booed by the live crowd, even though he was pushed in the top face position as fans wanted Flair back on top after the failed reign. Just days later, Flair's old nemesis, The Dream, returned as booker, with inside rumors saying priority numero uno was to gain revenge on the person he felt largely cost him his booking job 2 years earlier. A disputed title switch took place when the Dusty Finish made its way to the Tokyo Dome on March 21st in a match with Tatsumi Fujinami before a sellout 64,500 fans, which is still the largest wrestling crowd and indoor sports crowd ever in Japan. Fujinami pinned Flair to gain the title, but the decision was reversed by the over-the-top rope DQ being called moments before the pin by a second referee after a ref bump. The NWA title still was regarded as the #1 belt in Japan because of historical reasons going back to the days of Lou Thesz, and Fujinami becoming champ was huge news. In Japan it was billed that Fujinami was NWA champ, albeit without a belt, and Flair was WCW champ. On May 19 in St. Petersburg, when Flair pinned Fujinami, he regained the NWA title and the belts were his won. In the United States, it was simply viewed that it was a DQ finish and no title changed hands. But the tension continued, since the superbooker and self-proclaimed genius was unable to turn around business, so once again it was Flair's fault. Actually, by this point the company was on such a downward slide, no single person was to blame and no single person could stop the fall. Flair was scheduled once again to drop the title to Luger in July in Baltimore and the Great American Bash for the final time. At this point a major contract dispute came down between Flair and Hurd, with Flair wanting a contract extension in exchange for dropping the strap cleanly. Hurd also wanted to negotiate down an existing year on Flair's contract, which at the time was in the $700,000 per year range. Negotiations came down to the wire, and the decision was made to instead drop the title 2 weeks before the pay-per-view, at a television taping in Macon, Georgia to Barry Windham. It was touch and go whether Flair would show up at the taping, but officially before the taping he most likely would have no-shown. Flair was fired by Hurd. With Flair off the show, the Bash turned into the We Want Flair protest show and was quite possibly the worst pay-per-view show in wrestling history. Technically, Flair retained the NWA title as its paper board refused to go along with Hurd, as the NWA/WCW were having their own disputes at the time. That meant nothing in reality other than it showed the NWA and WCW title weren't one and the same. After years of coming close to making the move, Flair, who sat out the summer while being paid his $14 Gs per week by WCW, was finally in the WWF in September. By October, the long-awaited Ric Flair vs. Hulk Hogan series of matches took place. They opened to big crowds, but the crowds didn't sustain and overall this series didn't come close to achieving expectations either in match quality or at the box office. It was largely felt that WWF blew it by rushing Flair into the mix as a WWF performer rather than keeping the illusion of him as a separate entity. 1992, at the Royal Rumble, on January 19 in Albany, New York, Flair was given the WWF title. He was the second man in the Rumble, and focal point of the entire match, going 60 minutes before everyone else was eliminated, and he joined Buddy Rogers as the only wrestlers to hold both the NWA and WWF singles title. He held the title until April 5 at WrestleMania at the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis to Randy Savage. Flair regained the title from Savage on September 1 in Hershey, Pennsylvania at a TV taping in a match that went 15 minutes, then was stopped because Vince McMahon didn't like how it was going, and they were sent out and redid the match about a half hour later. Business was going great guns during Flair's first reign on top of the WWF, although it wouldn't be any more fair to give Flair major credit for it than to blame him for all the periods business wasn't good when he was on top for various companies. There were various reasons WWF business plummeted after Flair lost to Savage, and that title switch would be very low on any list. However, when Flair regained the title, business dropped again. At this point, two of the company's top babyfaces, Davey Boy Smith and Ultimate Warrior, both left within days of each other. At this point the company was forced to create an immediate babyface superstar to carry the promotion. In a rushed fashion, and with almost no notice, Bret Hart, considered an excellent worker, but someone who never would have even been considered for champion by previous WWF title standards, got the nod and the title from Flair on October 12 in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. The Hart vs. Flair rematches didn't draw, although many of the matches were great. Despite the fact the matches were well above typical WWF main event quality, it started a legit feud between the two because of heat on who would call the match and what they'd do during the matches, which resulted in Hart claiming Flair was the most overrated wrestler ever privately while he was still in the promotion, and publicly the following year after Flair had left. By the end of the year, it was obvious Flair's days on top in the WWF were numbered, which in the WWF meant a significant decrease in pay. Although no doubt he'd always have a key position since both his work rate and interview ability were still second to none, he would not be a headliner, thus not get main eventer money. At the same time, Bill Watts was running WCW and under much pressure to get something going. The We Want Flair chants, which started almost immediately upon Flair's departure some 18 months earlier, continued unabated. Watts opened negotiations for the home run move of bringing Flair back. After TV ratings on Sunday showed a marked increase when the company aired reruns of the 1989 Steamboat series with Flair, TBS, looking at ratings first, saw Flair getting Flair to return as something important once again. 1993, Flair and WCW put together a deal, with Flair losing a loser leaves town match to Mr. Perfect to end his WWF reign on a Monday Night Raw, which drew a shockingly low 2.6 rating. Flair arrived as a full-fledged babyface in WCW just days after Watts was given the heave-ho to a King's reaction in Asheville, North Carolina. Although he was doing interviews weekly on television in March, his debut was held back until June 16 in order to draw a Clash rating, a strategy that failed miserably with a 2.6 rating for a tag match with he and Arnold Anderson against Brian Pillman and Steve Austin, the lowest rated Clash in history. His number of title reigns became completely unclear, often referred to at this point as 9 WCW title reigns. In reality, he finally broke Harley Race's record to absolutely no fanfare, since the record he chased his whole career was simply forgotten. The record breaker was never even acknowledged in a July 18 NWA title win over Barry Windham, a disappointing match in Biloxi, Mississippi. He lost that title on September 17 to Rick Rude in Houston in another disappointing match. Despite having several strong matches on television during this time, the back-to-back below-standard matches and Flair's chronological age caused more talk than ever that he was through on top. With the exception of a few increased television ratings, Flair's return to WCW, while causing initial major commotion, was handled poorly, meant little as far as television ratings, and nothing as far as pay-per-view and house show business. He was in the process of being phased down and out, with Starrcade, the event he built, which at one time was the premier wrestling event of the year, taking place in his hometown, and he was scheduled third from the top in a tag match with longtime nemesis Steamboat against the Nasty Boys, a positioning that would have made any singles comeback even more difficult. While many, even most, considered Flair still among the top 5 or 6 workers in North America, when someone has been number 1 in the world for 10 years and considered by many as the greatest ever, any fall from that vaunted greatest position and from the top of the card when the big event is in his hometown is going to be noticeable to everyone. Somehow, as happened in 1988 when he was blamed by a booker who ruined the title in all the court towns with screw job finishes for not being able to draw, as happened in 1989 when management deemed him too old and blamed him for not being able to draw with management that didn't know the first thing about the emotions that put fans in the seats, as happened in 1990 when he was finally removed from the top, as happened in 1991 when the same management that gave up on him and blamed him put him right back on top, as happened again in 1991 when that same management fired him, and has continued to happen. When he was written off as being past his prime and having outlived his usefulness, he somehow was back on top in very short order. The ultimate irony was not that Ric Flair's finest hour as a professional wrestler came many years after numerous people in management, and even many fans had come to the conclusion his days as a key performer were over. It was because a man with every obvious sign of disaster written all over him going in was still being handed the company's top star position by a new management team that somehow understood even less than the previous inept management, freaked out and nearly killed Ric's best friend in real life, that all this took place. With nowhere to go. As happened time after time when the ideas that were going to save the company failed and the savior self-destructed, the only idea left was to go back to Ric Flair. Somehow this time the end result was the greatest production and greatest performance in the history of the company. The rest of the show. Terry Taylor pinned the Equalizer in a dark match. Dud. 1. Paul Orndorff and Paul Roma beat Too Cold Scorpio and Marcus Bagwell in 11:45 when the assassin gave Scorpio a loaded headbutt and Orndorff pinned him. First disappointing match on the show, as Scorpio and Bagwell were nowhere near the level they'd reached on previous major shows or even normal television matches. 1 3/4 stars. 2. Shockmaster pinned King Kong in 134 after a body slam. Dud. 3. Steve Regal retained the WCW TV title going to what was billed as a 15-minute draw, which actually went 13-10, with Rick Steamboat. Another disappointment. 1 3/4 stars. 4. Cactus Jack and Max Payne beat Tex Slashinger and Shanghai Pierce in 7:48 when Jack pinned Pierce with a double-arm DDT. Match was uneventful until Jack tried a lucha libre move of being backdropped over the top rope by Payne and turning it into a plancha dive, which looked like it nearly killed him. 1 1/4 stars. 5. Steve Austin won the U.S. title in a February 3 fall match with Dustin Rhodes. This was the second best match on the card. It was worked old style early, but the blows were all stiff and everything looked solid. Rhodes was DQ'd in the first fall in 13:32 when he whipped Austin into Rob Parker, and Austin went over the top for a very cheap-looking finish. Rhodes posted Austin between falls and Austin juiced heavy. Austin got the second fall pin out of nowhere using the tights in 128 and was announced as new champ. Since when does a title change hands when the challenger wins a fall with a DQ finish? Good thing it's wrestling, so you can change storylines and rules at will. Speaking of changing storylines, how many people seeing Rick family man Flair with his wife and kids are confused from all the months of seeing Flair with Fifi on television? 2 3/4 stars. 6. Rick Rude retained the WCW International World title, pinning the Boss, Ray Big Bubba Bossman Rogers trailer, in 908. Bossman crouched himself on the ropes and Rude pinned him with a sunset flip. Not nearly as good as their television match. Rude got a good heel reaction coming out, so some people haven't caught on. They should not even worry about unification, they should just make this belt disappear. 2 stars. 7. Sting and Hawk beat Nasty Boys via DQ in 29-11. Missy Hyatt gave Hawk a black rose before the match. Although sloppy at times, in some ways it wasn't that bad. But they were out there far too long to have such a weak finish. They did the Road Warrior finish on Knobs and Sting put him in the Scorpion when Missy Hyatt interfered for the DQ. I'm in the minority on this, but I didn't think the match was that bad, although the idea of them going that long for such a weak finish was awful. This may not have been the scheduled finish, as they may have booked it to go the full 30 minutes, but Sags was injured and hospitalized after the card, and they may have done a quickie impromptu DQ finish that didn't work. 2.5 stars. 8. Flair pinned Vader in 21-11 to win the WCW title. Tremendous storyline and psychology. Pretty much everyone knew that Flair was going to win, so Vader just destroyed him early to the point it raised serious doubt. Whenever Flair would get an advantage, Harley Race would interfere and turn the tables. A Vader clothesline busted Flair's lip, mouth and tongue and loosened some of his teeth, and he was bleeding badly the rest of the way. After kicking out of a superplex, Flair made a comeback working on Vader's knee, wrapping it around the post and hitting him with a chair. It turned into some great brawling outside the ring. After another Vader cutoff, he missed a splash and Flair got him in the figure 4, but Vader made the ropes. Finally Vader missed a moonsault, Flair went for the cover, Vader kicked Flair off, and at the same moment 50-year-old King Harley came off the top rope with a diving headbutt and hit Vader. Flair tried a tackle, but he was the one who went down. As Vader turned his back, Flair clipped Vader and schoolboyed him for the pin. 4.5 stars. If you haven't sent in your awards ballots, please do so immediately, as I'm looking at the January 17th issue as being the double issue, which means awards deadline for inclusion would be January 10th. If you're going to mail, please do so yesterday. You can fax or phone message your awards, but try to do so by January 8th. This is the final issue of the current set, which means if you've got A1 on the address label, your subscription expires with this issue. Renewal rates in the United States, Canada and Mexico are $6 for 4 issues, $12 for 8, $24 for 16, $36 for 24, $48 for 32 up through $60 for 40. Rates for the rest of the world are $9 for each set of 4 issues up through $90 for 40. Occasional 20-page issues count as 2 issues on the subscription. All subscription renewals along with letters to the editor, reports of arena shows and other news items should be sent to the Wrestling Observer Newsletter, P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 950091228. Fax messages can be sent to the Observer at 408-378-6562 afternoon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific, on a daily basis. Phone messages can be left at 408-379-8067 24 hours per day. Results. November 29th, Hakodate, All Japan, 3,600 sellout. Yoshinari Ogawa beat Masao Inoue. The Eagle beat Tamon Honda, Rusher Kimura and Mighty Inoue, and Mitsuo Momota beat Masa Fuchi and Haruka Eigen and Ryuma Izumida 24-01. Giant Baba and Dory Funk beat Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2. Dan Crawford and Doug Furness beat Tracy Smothers and Richard Slinger. Stan Hansen and Danny Spivey and Johnny Ace beat Steve Williams and Big Bubba Rogers and the Patriot. Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama beat Akira Tao and Toshiaki Kawada and Takao Amori 22-27. November 29th, Kochi FMW 3637, Gasaku Goshigawara beat Mr. Chin. Tetsuhiro Kuroda beat Dark Ranger. The Gladiator beat Hideki Hasaka, Combat Toyota and Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Matamari and Sapuri Mac beat Megumi Kudo and Miwa Sato and Yuki Nabano and Keiko Iwam. Big Titan beat Sabu Kor, Dr. Lucer and Dr. Hannibal and Ricky Fuji beat Tarzan Goto and Battle Ranger and Masato Tanaka. No Rope Barbed Wire Tornado Street Fight Deathmatch, Atsushi Onita and Katsutoshi Niyama and Koji Nakagawa beat Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Masaru Toi. November 29th, Himeji Wings, Hido B. Rio Mike, Miguelito Perez B1 Staringer, Jason the Terrible B. Jado DQ, non-title. Crash the Terminator B. Crypt Keeper, Perez B. Ghetto DQ, Headhunters B. Nobutaka Araya and Shoji Nakamaki. November 30th Sapporo All Japan, 6,800 sellout, Tracy Smothers and Richard Slinger B. Yoshinari Ogawa and Misao Inoue, Masafuchi and Haruka Eigen and Ryuma Izumida B. Rusher Kimura and Mighty Inoue and Mitsuo Momota, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness B. Dory Funk and Takao Mori, The Patriot and the Eagle B. Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taubi Jun Akiyama and Tamon Honda, Steve Williams and Big Bubba Rogers B. Danny Spivey and Johnny Ace, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi D. Giant Baba and Stan Hansen 30 minutes. November 30th Kurashiki FMW 3707, Tetsuhiro Kuroda B. Gasaku Goshigawara, Dr. Hannibal B. Masato Tanaka, Megumi Kudo B. Supreme Mac, Dr. Lucer B. Battle Ranger, Big Titan and the Gladiator B. Hisakatsu Oya and Dark Ranger, Combat Toyota and Crusher Matamari and Shark Tsuchiya B. Miwa Sato and Yuki Nabano and Keiko Iwam, Sabu and Damien B. Tarzan Goto and Koji Nakagawa, No Rope Barbed Wire Tornado Street Fight Deathmatch, Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako and Katsutoshi Niyama B. Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Hideki Hasaka. November 30th Osaka, Wings, 1 Staringer B. Hido, Rio Mike B. 1 Staringer, Mike B. Hido DQ, Miguelito Perez B. Crash the Terminator, Jason the Terrible B. Nobutaka Araya, Crypt Keeper B. Shoji Nakamaki, Tournament Championship match, Geto and Jado B. Headhunters to win tournament December 1st Nagoya, All Japan 4,200 Yoshinari Ogawa B. Satoru Asako, Rusher Kimura and Mighty Inoue B. Masafuchi and Masao Inoue, Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2 B. Haruka Eigen and Ryuma Izumida, Danny Spivey and Johnny Ace B. Dory Funk and Takao Mori, Dan Crawford and Doug Furness B. Jun Akiyama and Tamon Honda 2229, Stan Hansen and Giant Baba B. Tracy Smothers and Richard Slinger, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi B. The Eagle and the Patriot, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taubi Steve Williams and Big Bubba Rogers 2242. December 1st Takasaki, New Japan 2260 Shinjiro Otani B. Yuji Nagata, Brad Reingens B. Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Black Cat B. Satoshi Kojima, Mike Enos and Black Tiger B. El Samurai and Osamu Kido, Tatsutoshi Goto B. Takayuki Izuka, Nasty Boys B. Jushin Liger and Keiji Muto, Scott Nordman Hercules Fernandez B. Masa Saito and Masa Chono, Kengo Kimura and Shiro Koshinaka and Great Kabuki and Kunyaki Kobayashi and Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara B. Tatsumi Fujinami and Shinya Hashimoto and Hiroshi Hazi and Akira Nagami and Izuka. December 1st Hakata FMW 3219 sellout, Masato Tanaka B. Dark Ranger, Gasaku Goshigawara B. Mr. Chin, Hisakatsu Oya B. Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Dr. Lucer and Dr. Hannibal B. Sabu and Damien, Combat Toyota and Crusher Matamari and Shark Tsuchiya and Supreme Mac B. Megumi Kudo and Miwa Sato and Yuki Nabano and Nurse Nakamura, Big Titan and the Gladiator and Riki Fuji B. Tarzan Goto and Battle Ranger and Koji Nakagawa Elimination Match, Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako and Katsutoshi Niyama B. Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Hideki Hasaka 2118. December 1st Kyoto, JWP, 1,250 sellout, Boyashoi Kid B. Fuseo Noki, Dynamite Kansai, and Plum Marco B. Candy Akutsu and Mayumi Ozaki, Devil Masami B. Hikari Fukuoka, Kansai and Boyashoi and Marco B. Ozaki and Akutsu and Suzuki. December 1st in Awashiro, Michinoku Pro, 170, Wellington Wilkins Jr. B. Akihiro Hoshikawa, Superboy B. Masato Yakashiji, Jinsei Shinzaki B. Akihito Yonakawa Sato and Nakajima and Shiryu B. Predator and Grand Naniwa and Crazy Boy, Great Sasuke and Takamichi no Ku B. Terry Boy and Jerry Lin. December 2nd Fuji, All Japan 3050, Masao Inoue B. Tamon Honda, Mighty Inoue B. Takao Mori, Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2 B. Dory Funk and Doug Furness, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota B. Masafuchi and Haruka Eigen and Ryuma Izumida, The Patriot and the Eagle B. Tracy Smothers and Richard Slinger, Steve Williams and Big Bubba Rogers and Dan Crawford B. Stan Hansen and Johnny Ace and Danny Spivey, Mitsuharu Misawa and Kena Kobashi and Jun Akiyama B. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa 2102. December 2nd Koga, New Japan, 1,580 sellout, Shinji Otani B. Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Takayuki Izuka B. Yuji Nagata, Kunyaki Kobayashi B. Satoshi Kojima, El Samurai B. Black Cat, Tatsutoshi Goto be Akira Nagami, Kengo Kimura and Shiro Koshinaka and Great Kabuki be Keiji Muto and Jushin Liger and Osamu Kido. Nasty Boys be Masa Saito and Masa Chono, Tatsumi Fujinami and Hiroshi Hazi and Shinya Hashimoto be Scott Norton and Hercules Fernandez and Mike Enos. December 2nd Tokyo Komazawa Gym, Wings, 900 Masayoshi Motegi and 1 Steringer and Fukuma Enduro and Ryo Might be Shinichi Nakano and the Hopper King and Hirofumi Miura and Shoichi Maruyama, Boro Tsurumi be Haido, Shunji Takano be Hiroshi Shimada, Miguelito Perez be Crash the Terminator, Headhunter at DDQ Headhunter be Crypt Keeper and Freddy Krueger, not Doug Gilbert, be Jason the Terrible and Perez, Barbed Wire Match, Geto and Jado be Nobutaka Araya and Shoji Nakamaki. December 2nd Kawasaki, JWP, One Night Tournament, Hikari Fukuoka be Plum Moriko, Boyashoi Kid be Candy Akutsu, Fukuoka be Fuseo Noki, Fukuoka be Boyashoi, JWP Tag Title Mayumi Ozaki and Cutie Suzuki be Dynamite Kansai and Devil Masami 25-22 to win titles. December 2nd Atake, Michinoku Pro, 218, Nakajima D. Wellington Wilkins Jr., Terry Boy and Takamichi Noku be Masato Yakashiji and Akiro Hoshikawa, Jerry Lin be Shiryu, Superboy and Crazy Boy Grand Naniwa and Jinsei Shinzaki Great Sasuke and Sato be Predator and Akihito Yonakawa. December 3rd Tokyo Korakuen Hall, New Japan, 2000 Sellout, Shinjiro Otani and Yuji Nagata be Satoshi Kojima and Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Nasty Boys be Akira Nagami and Takayuki Izuka, Scott Norton and Hercules Fernandez and Mike Enos be Keiji Muto and Masa Chono and Hiroshi Hazi, Super Strong Machine and Hiromichi Fuyuki be Kunyaki Kobayashi and Tatsutoshi Goto, Machine and Fuyuki be Hiro Saito and Norio Onaga, Great Kabuki and Shiro Koshinaka be Black Cat and El Samurai, Kengo Kimura be Jushin Liger 2332, Tatsumi Fujinami be Masashi Aoyagi, Shinya Hashimoto be Michiyoshi Ohara. December 3rd Takaishi, FMW, 2858 Sellout, Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa be Gasaku Goshigawara and Mr. Chin, Big Titan and Dr. Hannibal be Katsutoshi Niyama and Battle Ranger, The Gladiator and Riki Fuji be Hisakatsu Oya and Dark Ranger, Dr. Lucer be Damien, The Sheik be Gregory Verichev, Combat Toyota and Crusher Matomari and Shark Tsuchiya and Sapuri Mac be Megumi Kudo and Miwa Sato and Yuki Nabano and Nurse Nakamura, Tarzan Goto be Sabu Core, No Rope Barbed Wire Elimination Match, Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Hideki Hasaka be Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako and Mr. Ganasuke. December 3rd Hitachi, All Japan Women, 1295, Kumiko Makawa be Yoko, Chikako Shiratori be Chaperda Asari, Mima Shimoda be Atsuko Mita, Tashio Yamada and Kyoko Inoue be Kaoru Ito and Tomoko Watanabe, Bull Nakano and Suzuka Minami be Asia Kong and Saki Hasegawa, Minami Toyota and Akira Hokuto be Takako Inoue and Yumiko Hata. December 3rd Yonezawa Michinoku Pro 235, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Akira Hoshikawa, Nakajima be Masato Yakashiji, Crazy Boy to Predator, Superboy be Akihito Yonakawa, Sato and Shiryu be Jerry Lin and Terry Boy, Grand Naniwa and Jinsei Shinzaki be Great Sasuke and Takamichi Noku. December 4th Anaheim, WWF, 6400, Owen Hart be Johnny Polo, Bam Bam Bigelow be Doink the Clown, Lex Luger be Ludwig Borga, Bastion Booger be Marty Jannetty, Head Shrinkers be Men on Mission, Bret Hart be Jeff Jarrett WWF Tag Title, Rick and Scott Steiner be Quebecers DQ. December 4th New Mazu, New Japan, 2190 Sellout, Yuji Nagata be Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Masashi Aoyagi be Shinjiro Otani, Osamu Kido be Brad Reingens, Mike Enos be El Samurai, Nasty Boys be Hiroshi Hazi and Satoshi Kojima, Scott Norton and Hercules Fernandez be Black Cat and Tatsumi Fujinami, Keiji Muto and Masa Chono be Kengo Kimura and Michiyoshi Ohara, Tatsutoshi Goto and Great Kabuki and Shiro Koshinaka be Jushin Liger and Takayuki Izuka and Shinya Hashimoto. December 4th Kanazawa FMW 3263 Sellout, Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Koji Nakagawa be Gasaku Goshigawara and Masato Tanaka, Battle Ranger be Dark Ranger, Big Titan be Mr. Ganasuke, Gregory Verichev be Hideki Hasaka, Megumi Kudo and Miwa Sato and Yuki Nabano and Nurse Nakamura be Combat Toyota and Crusher Matomari and Shark Tsuchiya and Sapuri Mac, The Sheik and Sabu and Damien be The Gladiator and Dr. Lucer and Riki Fuji, Tarzan Goto be Dr. Hannibal, No Rope Barbed Wire Tornado Street Fight Death Match, Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Hisakatsu Oya be Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako and Katsutoshi Niyama. December 4th Shiajiori, All Japan Women, 1325, Chaparita Asari be Kumiko Maikawa, Saki Hasegawa and Tomoko Watanabe be Etsuko Mita and Chikako Shiratori, Tashio Yamada and Kyoko Inoue be Yumiko Hara and Kaoru Ito, Asia Kong be Mima Shimoda, Bull Nakano and Suzuka Minami be Akita Hokuto and Minami Toyota. December 4th Yamanobe, Michinoku Pro, 306, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Azteca, Terry Boy and Nakajima be Masato Yakashiji and Akiro Hoshikawa, Super Delphin and Predator be Crazy Boy and Superboy, Sato and Great Sasuke and Shiryu be Akihito Yonokawa and Jinsei Shinzaki and Grand Naniwa. December 5th Mito, New Japan 2250, Shinjiro Otani be Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Brad Reingens be Yuji Nagata, Hercules Fernandez be Satoshi Kojima, Great Kabuki and Shiro Koshinaka be Jushin Liger and El Samurai, Scott Norton be Takayuki Izuka, Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara be Black Cat and Masa Chono, Kengo Kimura and Shiro Koshinaka be Keiji Muto and Osamu Kido, Tatsumi Fujinami and Shinya Hashimoto and Hiroshi Hazi be Nasty Boys and Mike Enos. December 5th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, PWFG 1904, Carl Greco be Shuichi Funaki, Don Arakawa be Daisuke Ikeda, Berto Duzel be Katsumi Usada, Yuki Ishikawa be Charlie Anderson, Yoshiaki Fujiwara be Glenn Jacobs. December 5th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Pro Wrestling Crusaders, 1500 Tournament for PWC Junior HWT title shot, Toyonari Fujita be Keisuke Yamada, Kazu be Tsunehito Naito, Masahiko Takasugi be 1 Staringer Core, Kazu be Fujita, Kazuhiko Matsuzaki be Takasugi DQ. Matsuzaki be Kazu to win tournament. After winning, Matsuzaki gave title shot to Kazu saying he has no interest in a junior heavyweight title. Uday Min be the Viper DQ to earn junior HWT title shot. Yoshiaki Yatsubi Nobutaka Araya, Shunji Takano be Power X. December 5th Nagahama FMW, 2809, Masato Tanaka and Tetsuhiro Kuroda be Gasaku Goshigawara and Mr. Chin, Dr. Lucer be Battle Ranger, Damien be Koji Nakagawa, Dr. Hannibal and Big Titan be Hisakatsu Oya and Dark Ranger. The Gladiator be Katsutoshi Niyama, Combat Toyota and Crusher Maidamari and Shark Tsuchiya and Sapuri Mac be Megumi Kudo and Miwasato and Yuki Nabano and Keiko Iwam, Tarzan Goto and Gregory Varichev DDQ the Sheik and Sabu, No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Deathmatch, Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako and Mr. Ganasuke Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Hideki Hasaka. December 5th Yamanashi, All Japan Women Kumiko Makawa be Yoko, Chikako Shiratori be Chaparita Asari, Atsuko Mita be Tomoko Watanabe, Bull Nakano and Akira Hokuto and Mima Shimoda be Takako Inoue and Kyoko Inoue and Yumiko Hara, Suzuka Minami be Kaoru Ito, Minami Toyota and Tashio Yamada be Asia Kong and Saki Hasegawa. December 5th Mikawa, Michinoku Pro, 205 Sellout, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Akiro Hoshikawa, Taka Michinoku be Akihito Yonokawa, Jinsei Shinzaki be Shiryu, Super Delphin and Predator be Terry Boy and Jerry Lin, Sato and Great Sasuke and Nakajima be Superboy and Grand Naniwa and Crazy Boy 2128. December 6th Bournemouth, England WWF, Adam Bomb be Virgil, Smoking Guns be Red and Black Knight, Steve Lombardi and Barry Horowitz, Tatanka be Diesel DQ. 123 Kid be Rick Martel, IC title, Razor Ramon be IRS, Randy Savage be Shawn Michaels WWF title, The Undertaker be Yokozuna DQ. December 6th Toyama, New Japan 3150, Shinjiro Otani d Yuji Nagata, El Samurai be Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Kengo Kimura be Satoshi Kojima, Jushin Liger and Osamu Kido be Brad Reingens and Mike Enos, Great Kabuki be Black Cat, Scott Norton and Hercules Fernandez be Takayuki Izuka and Masa Chono. Nasty Boys be Masa Saito and Keiji Muto, Tatsumi Fujinami and Hiroshi Hazi and Shinya Hashimoto be Shiro Koshinaka and Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara. December 6th Okazaki FMW 3010, Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda be Gasaku Goshigawara and Mr. Chin, Masaru Toy and Dark Ranger be Battle Ranger and Masato Tanaka, Big Titan be Katsutoshi Niyama, The Sheik and Sabu and Damien be Dr. Lucer and Dr. Hannibal and Ricky Fuji, Crusher Maidamari and Shark Tsuchiya and Sapuri Mac be Miwa Sato and Yuki Nabano and Nurse Nakamura, Gregory Varichev be The Gladiator, No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Deathmatch, Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto and Samba Asako and Mr. Genosuke be Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Hisakatsu Oya and Hideki Hasaka. December 6, Oga, Michinoku Pro 103, Taka Michinoku be Masato Yakashiji, Crazy Boy be Nakajima, Jerry Lynn and Terry Boy and Wellington Wilkins Jr. Jinsei Shinzaki and Grand Naniwa and Akihito Yonokawa, Great Sasuke be Superboy, Sato and Shiryu be Super Delphin and the Predator. December 7, Fukui, New Japan, 3030 sellout, Satoshi Kojima be Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Michiyoshi Ohara be Shinjiro Otani, Osamu Kido be Yuji Nagata, Tatsutoshi Goto be Takayuki Izuka, Nasty Boys be El Samurai and Black Cat, Keiji Muto and Jushin Liger be Great Kabuki and Kunyaki Kobayashi, Kango Kimura and Shiro Koshinaka be Hiroshi Hazi and Masa Chono, Tatsumi Fujinami and Masa Saito and Shinya Hashimoto be Scott Norton and Hercules Fernandez and Mike Enos. December 7, Choshi FMW, 3179 sellout, Masato Tanaka and Tetsuhiro Kuroda be Gasaku Goshigawara and Mr. Chin, Masaru Toi and Dark Ranger be Battle Ranger and Koji Nakagawa, Katsutoshi Niyama be Hideki Hasaka, Combat Toyota and Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Matamari and Supremac be Megumi Kudo and Miwa Sato and Nurse Nakamura and Keiko Iwam, Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Hisakatsu Oya be Big Titan and the Gladiator and Ricky Fuji, Tarzan Goto and Gregory Vericha be Dr. Lucer and Dr. Hannibal, No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Death Match, Atsushi Onita and Samba Asako and Mr. Genosuke be the Sheik and Sabu and Damien. December 7, Louisville, USWA, 1000 El Rios the American Eagle No. 2, Warlock be American Eagle No. 1, Little Eagle be Midget D, War Machines be Doug Gilbert and Dutch Mantle, Jeff Gaylord and Mike Anthony be PG-13, Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher be Reggie B. Fina and Buddy Landell. December 7, Hanamaki, Michinoku Pro, 215, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Akira Hoshikawa, Nakajima be Akihito Yonokawa, Terry Boy and Jerry Lynn DDQ Superboy and Crazy Boy, Super Delphin and the Predator be Jinsei Shinzaki and Grand Naniwa, Great Sasuke and Taka Michinoku D. Sato and Shiryu 30 minutes. December 8, Osaka Furitsu Gym, Rings, 6,838 sellout, Grom Zaza be Hank Newman, Tudor Todorov be Masayoshi Naruse, Georgi Gandalaki be Sarsenia Zulab, Dirk Leon Frey be Yoshihiro Yamamoto, Fulcon be Pavel Orlov, Vitars Teriel be Nikolai Zuov, Akira Maeda be Chris Dolman. December 8, Hakata Pancrase 2,940 sellout, Yusuke Fut be Katsumi Inagaki, Rishi Yanagisawa be Vernon White, Minoru Suzuki be James Matthews, Wayne Shamrock be Andre Van Den de Telar, Masakatsu Funaki be Yoshiki Takahashi. December 9, Shiga New Japan 2290 Yuji Nagata be Shinjiro Otani, Brad Reingens be Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Black Cat be Manabu Nakanishi, Kunyaki Kobayashi and Tatsutoshi Goto be Osamu Kido and Takayuki Izuka, Kengo Kimura and Great Kabuki be Jushin Liger and Satoshi Kojima, Nasty Boys be Masachono and El Samurai, Tatsumi Fujinami and Shinya Hashimoto be Shiro Koshinaka and Michiyoshi Ohara, Keiji Muto and Hiroshi Hazi and Masa Saito be Mike Enos and Hercules Fernandez and Scott Norton. December 9, Nishio All Japan Women, 1180 Kumiko Makawa be Yoko, Chaparita Asari be Chikako Shiratori, Saki Hasagawa be Tomoko Watanabe, Kyoko Inoue and Bull Nakano be Mima Shimoda and Yumiko Hata, Suzuka Minami be Etsuko Mita, Manami Toyota and Tashio Yamada be Asia Kong and Kaoru Ito. December 9, Ichiniseki, Michinoku Pro, 243 sellout, Nakajima be Akira Hoshikawa, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Akihito Yonokawa, Jerry Lynn and Terry Boy be Jinsei Shinzaki and Grand Naniwa, Sato and Shiryu be Superboy and Crazy Boy, Great Sasuke and Taka Michinoku be Super Delphin and the Predator. December 10, Dallas Sportatorium, GWF, Ricky Long be Jeep Swenson DQ, Mike Davis be Mo Dib Core, Action Jackson be Mike Lane, Iceman King Parsons NC Gladiator, Angel be Brian Henning, John Hawk NC Scott Putsky, Davis and Stephen Dane be Alex Porto and Lane, Chris Adams be Rod Price. December 10, Morioka, Michinoku Pro, 2,310 sellout, Shiryu be Masato Yakashiji, Wellington Wilkins Jr. be Akira Hoshikawa, Nakajima be Grand Naniwa, Jinsei Shinzaki and Damien be the Predator and Akihito Yonokawa, Battle Ranger and Terry Boy and Taka Michinoku be Ricky Fuji and Superboy and Crazy Boy, Sabu be Jerry Lynn, Great Sasuke and Tarzan Goto be Mr. Pogo and Masaru Toi, Mask vs. Mask, Super Delfin B. Sato. December 11th Nashville, USWA, Del Rios DJ Wolf, Dutch Mintel B. The Warlock, Jeff Gaylord and Mike Anthony B. War Machines, American Eagles B. PG-13, Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher B. Doug Gilbert and Mad Dog. December 11th Susanoo All Japan Women, Kumiko Makawa B. Chikako Shiratori, Kaoru Ito B. Tomoko Watanabe, Asia Kong and Bull Nakano B. Atsuko Mita and Suzuka Minami, Kyoko Inoue B. Mima Shimoda, Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada B. Yumiko Hata and Saki Hasegawa 2028. December 14th Arena Coliseo in Mexico City, EMLL, Javier Roca and Kato Kung Lee Jr. B. Komoden and Astro Jr., Olympico and Olympus B. Ponzonia and Huevo Lynx, Escudero Rojo and Reyes Velos, and Cadaver de Ultratumba B. Filoso and Trueno and Talisman Jr., Brazo de Oro and Blue Demon Jr. and Leo del Solitario B. Popotecas and Titan and Espectro Jr. DQ, Jacques Maid and Cajos I and Bestia Salvaje de Corazon de Leon and El Brazo and Brazo de Plata. December 15th Acapulco EMLL Aspirant and Ponky B. Histrion and Centurio Los Brazos B. Ciclone Ramirez and Blue Demon Jr. and Oso Negro. NWA Middleweight Title Corazon de Leon B. Black Magic. December 16th Indianapolis Championship Wrestling from Indiana, PC Austin B. The Lumberjack, Flash Flanagan and Dan Childers B. The Interns, Mike Samples B. Eric Fontaine, American Eagle, Danny Davis B. Tracy Smothers, Junior Carby TJ Powers. December 17th Arena Coliseo in Mexico City, EMLL 5500 Sellout, Mascarada Magica and Aguilita Solitario B. Pequeno Guerrero Maya and Pequeno Guerrero del Futuro Ludwig Starr and Legendario B. Draco in America, Panico and Archangel de la Muerte and Damian El Guerrero B. Trident and Aguila Solitaria and Chamaco Volks, America Rocca and Ciclone Ramirez and Pantera 2 B. Tornado Negro Ian Felino and Moger, Dr. Wagner Jr. and Negro Casas and Mocho Cota B. Ringo Mendoza and Dandy and Ultimo Dragon. December 19th El Toreo in Naucalpan, UWA 6512 Team Losers Advanced Tag Tournament with eventual losers getting unmasked came down to Transformer and the King Abi Aguila Negro and Siniestro who were unmasked as Jose Angel and Fidel Alvarado respectively. UWA HWT title, Connect B. Vampiro Casanova to win title. December 19th Dallas, Big D, 168, Chuck West and Bill Andrews B. Billy Johnson and Mike Andrews, Miss Madeline B. Tasha Simone Love, Chris Rocks B. Ray Evans, Scott Braddock B. Jimmy James DQ, Tim Brooks B. Johnny Longhorn, Gary Young NC Mr. Fargo's 50% of Company vs. Judy Sturdivants, Big D. B. El Brujo to regain control of promotion. December 23rd Tokyo Korakuen Hall, JWP, Dynamite Kansai and Cutie Suzuki B. Devil Masami and Mayumi Ozaki 2255, Plum Mariko B. Boyoshoy Kid, Shikako Shiratori B. Fuseo Noki, Hikari Fukuoka B. Candy Akutsu 2049. December 25th Denver, WCW 3000, Tiki Tapu B. Don Juan, Johnny B. Bad B. Paul Roma, Paul Orndorff B. Eric Watts, Steve Austin B. Brian Pillman, Too Cold Scorpio and Marcus Bagwell B. Harlem Heat 2041, WCW International World Title, Ric Flair B. Rick Rude DQ, WCW Title, Vader B. Sting, Rude 1 Battle Royal. December 25th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, New Japan, 1360, Black Cat B. Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Shinjiro Otani and Manabu Nakanishi and Keiji Muto B. Masachono and Yuji Nagata and Satoshi Kojima, Jushin Liger and Akira Nagami B. Hiroshi Hazi and El Samurai. December 25th Knoxville, SMW 1700 Chris Condito B. Brian Armstrong, Prince Cars B. Bobby Blaze, Bruce Brothers Kermoondogs, Jim Cornette's Hair vs. Bullet's Mask, Dick Murdoch B. The Bullet. Bullet wore a second mask underneath so his identity wasn't revealed. Heavenly Bodies B. Doug and Mike Furness, triangular match for SMW title, Brian Lee won over Tracy Smothers and Dirty White Boy. December 25th Niigata, rings 3435 sellout, Tsuromaki B. Moriyasu, Koichiro Kimura B. Honba, Fred Schreiber B. Morikuzo Morichi, Willie Peters B. Yoshihisa Yamamoto, Masayoshi Naruse B. Eric Andras, Andre Kopolov B. Popiel, Akira Maeda B. Mitsuya Nagai. December 25th Dallas Sportatorium, GWF, 940/Few paid, Kendo Nagasaki B. John Armstrong, Action Jackson B. Chuck West, Rod Price B. Mike Davis, GWF Tag Title, Black Bart and John Hawk B. Chaz Taylor and Stephen Dane to win titles, Sweet Daddy Falcone B. Angel Corps, Bart B. Plowboy Wilbur, Stephen Dane B. Alex Porto DQ, GWF title, Chris Adams b Iceman King Parsons to win title. December 26, Toronto WWF, 7000, Smoking Guns b Red and Blue Knight, Owen Hart b Atom Bomb, IRS b123 Kid, 2 of 3 Falls, Crush b Randy Savage, WWF Tag Title, Rick and Scott Steiner b Quebecers DQ IC Title, Razor Ramon b Shawn Michaels DQ, WWF Title, The Undertaker b Yokozuna DQ. December 26, Johnson City, Tennessee SMW, 950, Chris Condito b Brian Armstrong 2 1/4 stars, Prince Cars b Bobby Blaze 3/4 of a star, Moondogs b Bruise Brothers 2 stars, Mask at Stake, The Bullet b Dick Murdoch 1 1/2 star, Heavenly Bodies and Doug and Mike Furnace 3 1/2 stars, Triangular Match for SMW title, Brian Lee 1 over Tracy Smothers and Dirty White Boy 3 1/2 stars. December 26, Tokyo Korakuen Hall FMW/Michinoku Pro 2150 sellout, Tetsuhiro Kuroda and Masato Tanaka b Mr. Chin and Gasaku Goshigawara, Katsuji Ueda b Akira Hoshikawa, Shiryu and Katsutoshi Niyama b Mr. Ganasuke and Nakajima, Shark Tsuchiya 1 Women's Battle Royal, Riki Fuji b Taka Michinoku, Hisakatsu Oya and Grand Naniwa and Akihito Yonokawa b Samba Asako and Koji Nakagawa and Terry Boy, Super Delphin b Battle Ranger, No Rope Barbed Wire Street Fight Tornado Deathmatch, Atsushi Onita and Tarzan Goto and Great Sasuke b Mr. Pogo and Jinsei Shinzaki, and Masaru Toi. December 27, Barberville, Kentucky SMW 800 Chris Condito b Brian Armstrong, Prince Cars b Bobby Blaze, Mask at Stake, The Bullet b Dick Murdoch, Moondogs b Bruise Brothers, Heavenly Bodies b Doug and Mike Furnace, Triangular Match for SMW title, Brian Lee 1 over Tracy Smothers and Dirty White Boy. Special thanks to Masayuki Osada, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Buddy La Mancha, Bedri Cullah, Dan Paris, Brian Hildebrand, Bob Verhey, Tim Whitehead, Freddie Fargo, Alexander Bohr. EMLL/U.W.A. Connect regained the UWA heavyweight title from Vampiro Casanova with a clean submission using the figure 4 leg lock in the third fall on December 19 at the El Toreo Bull Ring in Naucalpan. The show drew 6,500 fans, which is more than double the weekly average crowd, but had to be considered a disappointment considering how many weeks they had spent building it up, and it was pretty much considered almost a sure bet ahead of time that the title would change hands. It is expected that Vampiro will pretty much disappear from wrestling, at least for the short haul, to embark on a concert career, although reports are that his first 2 concerts held in Veracruz didn't draw at all. Connect first won the UWA title on August 27, 1978 in Mexico City from Lou Thez, the UWA's first world heavyweight champion when the promotion was formed in 1977. Thez was famous in Mexico when he was NWA champion, as he defended his title in Mexico when the NWA was a worldwide organization. The EMLL had always recognized the NWA World title up until that point, but none of the champions of the 60s and 70s ever defended the title. Mil Mascaras held the IWA title from the defunct Eddie Einhorn group, and regularly defended it, but it wasn't really recognized by anyone as a true world heavyweight title. The UWA title, since over the years it was held by such international big names as Antonio Inoki, Riki Choshu, Tatsumi Fujinami, Big Van Vader and others, and men like Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan, Stan Hansen, Billy Robinson and Abdullah the Butcher challenged Connect for the title over the years, and during the 70s and early 80s was regularly defended internationally, was until recently recognized as the real world title in Mexico. Right now, with the decline in interest of the UWA, the world title picture is a lot more fuzzy since EMLL created its world title, held by Brazo de Plata, and AAA has the IWC version, held by CN Caras. This is believed to be Connect's 11th reign with the title, although other sources list this as Connect's 14th reign, which among nationally recognized world titles, puts him up with Ric Flair and Vern Gagne for most world title victories. Black Magic, who held the CMLL heavyweight title for most of this year, lost when challenging for the NWA middleweight title on December 15 in Acapulco against Corazon de Leon. I'm not exactly sure why they have all these weight classes when a guy who weighs about 230 challenges for a title that supposedly has a 191-pound weight limit, and whose champion weights well over that weight limit as well. They had a big combined promotion show on December 26 in Guadalajara with Dandy and Atlantis and Dos Caras and Silver King vs. Connect and Villano 3 and Emilio Charles Jr. and Bestia Salvaje as the main event. 2 more members of the Alvarado Brazos family start regularly for EMLL on January 2, Super Brazo and Brazo de Platino. Bestia Salvaje and Emilio Charles Jr. didn't go on the mid-December Full Japan tour because they were only offered $800 for the tour. Woman wrestler Esther Moreno is now both booking and promoting weekly shows in a Mexico City suburban arena. Ana Moreno, a younger sister to Esther and Cynthia, has just started wrestling under the name Tiger Woman. Japan. With the exception of a few shows at Korakuen Hall, everything has been shut down the past week. What could be a bad omen for 1994 is that the Christmas week shows at Korakuen Hall, which used to be an automatic sellout building for any promotion of any size, drew some poor houses. Wings drew a horrible crowd of 600 on December 23 in a building they generally draw 1,200 to 2,000 inches LLPW, which traditionally can pack the hall. Drew 1,350 for a Christmas Eve card, although that may not be the best time to run a wrestling show. Don't know how JWP did for its December 23 show in the same building, only that they did an interesting concept of putting the top stars, Dynamite Kansai and Cutie Suzuki beating Devil Masami and Mayumi Ozaki as the opening match and put Hikari Fukuoka vs. Rookie Candy Akutsu as the main event. JWP wants to give Fukuoka and Akutsu a big push in 1994 and decided to put their match on and bill it as the main event as a way to start things out. Even New Japan for a Christmas night show drew only 1,360 with Jushin Liger and Akira Nagami vs. Hiroshi Hashi and El Samurai on top, which to my knowledge is only about the second time in the past 5 years that New Japan failed to sell out Korakuen. The only sellout I don't know about JWP, was a combined FMW and Michinoku Pro card on December 26. Wings will run what is now an annual New Year's Eve card which starts at 10:30 p.m. and runs past midnight on December 31. Ring's annual Battle Dimension tournament saw the semifinals on December 8 in Osaka before a sellout 6,833 fans as Baitar's Teriel beat Nikolai Zuov, a newcomer who is fairly impressive, and Akira Maeda beat last year's champion Chris Dolman, setting up Maeda vs. Teriel on January 21 at Budokan Hall. Don Nakia Nielsen, a former World Cruiserweight Champion kickboxer, who had famous mixed matches with Maeda, Yoshiaki Fujiwara and Jushin Liger in New Japan Rings years back, debuts for Rings on the card against Mitsuya Nagai, no doubt building to a Maeda-Nielsen rematch. The 1986 match is considered by many as the greatest mixed match of all time and they've never had a rematch. Lots of publicity around about Nobuhiko Takada's scheduled wedding on January 30. With the exception of the big shows on December 10 and December 13, New Japan's December cards seemed disappointing with a weak foreign crew and skinheads on top on the heel side, only selling out about half the shows. Michinoku Pro Wrestling, which promotes in small towns in northeastern Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan, and would be the Japanese equivalent of SMW, although SMW is generally more polished workers, drawing 100 to 600 per show, brought in several FMW wrestlers and pushed the lineups hard in the newspapers and magazines as being special shows. This resulted in a sellout 2,310 in Morioka on December 10 and packed Tagajo the next night with 2,342. Morioka was headlined by Super Delphin beating Sato in a mask vs. mask match. Great Sasuke and Tarzan Goto of FMW beating FMW heels Mr. Pogo and Masaru Toy. Plus Sabu pinned Jerry Lynn. December 11 saw Pogo and Toy team with Jinsei Shinzaki, a Michinoku rookie who is earning great praise doing an Undertaker-type knockoff role, beating Sasuke and Goto and Atsushi Onita. After the show, Sasuke went to Mexico City and met with Antonio Pena. Pena will be coming to Japan from January 2 to January 8, more in AAA section, including attending the Tokyo Dome show and the FMW card the next day. FMW wants a promotional agreement with FMW and to feature Kanon on its next major show. On the December 25 New Japan show at Korakuen, Liger did a Konda session with the audience and said that they'd be doing a junior heavyweight tournament next year and he wanted to bring in guys from the smaller Japanese promotions for the tournament, and mentioned specifically that he wanted a match against Sasuke. Right now Sasuke's group is tied up with FMW, so it was surprising for Liger to talk about having a match against someone in a small group and giving them that credibility. Speaking of Undertaker, Devil Masami is working about one show per month pushed in advance as Super Heel Devil cards where she wears the Undertaker black outfit, does her hair red like Undertaker and works as a major heel. Masami and Kansai lost their JWP tag titles to Suzuki and Ozaki on December 2 in Kawasaki. We'll try to hold back deadline next week to get the January 4 Tokyo Dome show rundown. New Japan held a press conference in Tokyo on December 21 for the contract signings for the various main events. They ran a subtle but believable angle between Antonio Inoki and Genichiro Tenryu at the press conference. Inoki wanted the match to only end with a submission or knockout, while Tenryu wanted the Pro Wrestling 3-count pinfall finish as well. The two argued and finally Inoki walked out without signing. Since the press conference, Seiji Sakaguchi announced that Inoki had agreed to pinfalls as a finish. There actually is a lot of speculation about this match in Japan because nobody can figure out which one of the two will do the job. Scorpio Jr. from UWA in Mexico will be appearing on New Japan's next tour as Red Scorpion. FMW will be holding a double elimination street fight tag team tournament from January 7th to January 18th with the winners getting the WFDA World Tag Team titles. Teams entered are Big Titan, Rick Bogner, and the Gladiator, Mike Alfonso, Hisakatsu Oya and Hideki Hasaka, Terry Sims from Dallas and Ricky Fuji Toy, and Shinzaki Goto and Mr. Ganasuke, Sabu, and Damien, Mr. Pogo and Mystery Partner, because Mitsuhiro Matsunaga is out of action after undergoing major knee surgery and perhaps suffering a broken neck as well, and Onita and Samba Asako. FMW will be holding a tournament to crown a new women's champion in February and will be bringing in several women wrestlers from the US including Fabulous Moolah, who won't work but will be on the tour, who will present the title belt to the tournament winner. All Japan Women ran an afternoon television show on December 12, airing December 6 Sumo Hall card, and drew a 7.2 rating, which shows, as their rare afternoon time slot shows seem to regularly show, an awful lot of mainstream interest when the show isn't on at 3 a.m. That's better than New Japan usually does, let alone double or triple All Japan or any American groups. Speaking of All Japan Women, Mariko Yoshida, who is one of the most promising of the younger women, who has been out of action for just 1 year because of a broken neck, is scheduled to return sometime early next year. She's been doing refereeing the last few months and even worked a few high spots into her refereeing. New Japan did a 6.8 rating on December 18th, airing matches taped December 10th in Nagoya headlined by Shinya Hashimoto vs. Keiji Muto for the IWGP title and Hercules and Scott Norton vs. Nasty Boys in a battle of World Tag Team Champions. All Japan did a 3.8 rating on December 19th for the Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi vs. Akira Tao and Toshiaki Kawada Tag Team Tournament Final. Richard Slinger, Johnny Gunn, John Noor and Brian Costello were added to the All Japan Tour that starts on January 2nd. January 2nd at Korakuen Hall will be a battle royal, Misawa and Kobashi and Akiyama vs. Hansen and Noor and Gunn, Kawada and Yoshinari Ogawa vs. Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton and Tao and Takao Amori vs. Abdullah the Butcher and Giant Kimala 2. On January 3rd at Korakuen Hall there will be a junior heavyweight battle royal, Kawada and Tao and Amori vs. Misawa and Kobashi and Akiyama, Noor and Hansen vs. Abdullah and Kimala and Johnny Ace vs. Tamon Honda. Koji Kao's promotion, which debuts on January 21st at Korakuen Hall, will bring in Americans Al Snow, Michigan, Wellington Wilkins Jr., Michinoku Pro lives in Japan, Rico Federico, Florida, James Magnum, Florida or Minnesota, and J.R. Carson, Minnesota. LLPW wrestlers voted Shinobu Kondori as their MVP. USWA because of Christmas being on Saturday, the television this weekend was all pre-taped. The highlights were Burt Prentice coming out dressed as Santa Claus and giving gifts to the fans and Eddie and Doug Gilbert attacking him and beating him up and destroying the gifts. Next week's Memphis TV, because of all the football bowl games, airs at 10:30 a.m. Sunday rather than its usual Saturday slot. The December 20th card in Memphis, headlined by Jerry Lawler regaining the title from Jeff Jarrett, saw the crowd pick up to $1,106,500. December 27th lineup was Killer Kyle vs. Mike Anthony, Reggie B. Fine vs. Del Rios, Vampire Warrior vs. Jeff Gaylord, Lauren Davenport vs. Sweet Georgia Brown, Brian Christopher vs. Buddy Landell, who has worked out his money differences and is back, for the USWA title, PG-13 vs. Chris Michaels and Todd Morton for the USWA tag title, Gilberts vs. Lawler and Christopher and a 2-ring battle royal. SMW. The highlight show of the 3-night Christmas Chaos Tour was December 25th in Knoxville, drawing 1,700 with all seats $6. The top matches saw the Bullet face Dick Murdoch in a match where Bullet put up his mask and Jim Cornette put up his hair. After Murdoch used a chain to get the pin, Bullet unmasked, but was wearing a second mask underneath so his identity wasn't revealed, as Bob Armstrong. Even though the face is saved as Bob Armstrong wasn't suspended, these things are going to make it a lot harder to sell either this significant thing or that significant thing is going to happen stipulation matches in the future, because in recent months they did a loser leaves town where nobody left, and a mask, albeit career on the line versus hair where no identity was revealed and no hair was shaved. Heavenly Bodies beat Mike and Doug Furness when Jimmy Del Rey hit Mike with the football helmet he had brought to the ring. The TV angle where the Bodies beat up Mike was really clumsy, but apparently the matches came off good since the Bodies can carry things and Doug worked most of the match. They're coming back on February 13th with a return match with a football helmet on a pole. Finale was a triangular match for the SMW title with Brian Lee, Tracy Smothers, and Dirty White Boy. White Boy was posted by Lee at the bell and laid out, so it was Lee versus Smothers early. Lee won when Chris Condito interfered, giving Smothers a DDT on a chair and threw him in the ring to be pinned. This left a bloody White Boy versus Lee. After White Boy made a comeback, Dirty White Girl was attacked and Tammy Fitch sprayed hairspray in White Boy's eyes and he was pinned. White Girl then jumped on Lee, but Fitch attacked her from behind and KO'd her with the purse. Smothers then made the save, but Lee went to hit him with a chair from behind and White Boy grabbed the chair from Lee and he was finally run off. Smothers and White Boy finally shook hands to a big pop to end the show. In the other cities, instead of Cornette's hair being at stake, it was $5,000, and in those matches Bullet pined Murdoch. Johnson City on December 26th drew 950 fans at $5 apiece, hurt because the TV was strangely preempted the day before the show. Barberville, Kentucky on December 27th, also with low ticket prices, drew 800 fans. At the Johnson City show, the match with Moondogs vs. Bruise Brothers, after the Dogs won, went backstage and they continued to brawl, which will result in it being announced that Bruise Brothers are suspended for 6 weeks and they'll return in mid-February. There are no plans to bring the Smoking Guns in for a talent exchange with WWF. Here and there. We've received only sketchy reports of the ECW show on December 26th in Philadelphia, but the crowd was said to be the second largest ever, in the 1,200 range, which was a packed house, and Terry Funk beat Sabu in the main event. Most of the talk centered after about how upset everyone was with the FMW idea-like explosion. It turned out to be Flair's set-off like in every major AAA ring entrance, and a tape played over the PA of an explosion and people were said to be furious and chanting refund. Funk Sabu was said to be a very good match. Hurricane Castillo Sr., a longtime star in Puerto Rico in the 70s through around 1987, passed away on December 11th from complications after internal surgery from loss of blood. Castillo had been suffering from diabetes. While I'm not 100% certain of this, I believe Castillo worked the WW.W.F. in the 70s as the Masked El Olympico, who was a mid-level wrestler in the mid-70s and more of a jobber in a late 70s tour. His son currently wrestles in Puerto Rico. Some notes from the December 18th show in Bremen, Germany. Told overall the show wasn't up to previous year's quality because the only strong matches were Terry Funk vs. Tony St. Clair and Jushin Liger vs. David Finlay, and Rambo vs. Barbarian was a major letdown. Crowd was about 12,000, which was a few thousand shy of capacity. More and more talk coming out of Germany that Larry Cameron's death was steroid-related, although officially that is attempting to be covered up in Germany because of the fear it'll bring bad publicity onto the CWA. Hulk Hogan has a single out in England that reached number 29 on the charts. The Thunder in Paradise show starts shooting on January 10th, with both Sting and Terry Funk having recurring guest roles. I should have a tape of the Love Machine vs. John Rambo match, reported on in December 20th Observer, which got out of control. The match was stiff in spots, but Machine claimed it was a forearm to the nose and not all-out punches which broke Rambo's nose, and that the only shooting was about 6 seconds, holding a front facelock, but no punches were thrown either in the ring or in a brief confrontation after the match. There has been talk of Rambo either filing criminal or civil charges from the match, but neither has materialized. Sandy Barr, the Oregon promoter, is planning a show in Yakima, Washington, which apparently has a large Spanish community using Pero Aguayo, Blue Panther, and Eddie Guerrero. Congrats to reader and mag writer Steve Muller on the birth of first son Max. Red Bastion had an old-timers convention on December 10th in Dallas, and among those attending were Tiger Conway Sr., Killer Carl Cox, Johnny Valentine, Reggie Parks, Mike Paidausis, Tex McKenzie, Leo Garibaldi, and Mad Dog Vachon. Fritz von Erich couldn't appear as he is recovering from surgery to replace both his knee joints. In Dallas, Big D and GWF go head-to-head on January 2nd, with GWF not only letting everyone in free, but also giving a free Coke to every fan who attends. GWF promoter Gray Pearson made a ruling that all GWF wrestlers couldn't work Big D shows. It hasn't hurt Big D attendance, although that may be because of the several-week-long angle for control of the promotion. Freddie Fargo's man El Brujo, Kit Carson, was facing Big D, promoter Gary Sturtevant, in a best-of-3 series in which either Fargo would have to leave the promotion or D would give it to him. Brujo won the climactic match on December 12th, and Fargo announced starting next week that anyone from New York would be let in free, and nobody in Texas would be allowed to attend future cards. At this point Judy Sturdivant, Big D's wife, came out and said that because of community property laws, she owns half the promotion and Fargo didn't win the half, so a rematch was set up for December 19th, winner take all. This time Big D, who was injured, came back to win. AAA. Antonio Pena is headed to Japan from January 2nd to January 8th to attend both the Tokyo Dome New Japan show and FMW shows and attempt to negotiate with both groups. While it would be a major feather to get a deal with New Japan, Pena's guys would have a better chance at being put over as headliners and as key parts of major shows with FMW. Pena is also going to meet with all the magazines and newspapers in an attempt to get AAA regular weekly coverage, thus get his wrestlers over so they'll mean something when they tour Japan. Pena is also negotiating with Jimmy Suzuki to be a PR representative and arrange promotional tie-ups with European and Japanese offices. AAA starts back in action on January 8th with regular shows. This past weekend they aired the August 29th San Diego and November 12th Los Angeles cards. The San Diego show wasn't much, and the Los Angeles show was okay. Actually the undercard was better than I remembered it being, but the main event was much better lived because of the heat. However, the best part of the entire card, which was the post-match heavy metal face turn, was edited off the show. Eddie Guerrero is already ready to return from the torn groin suffered in Japan. WWF business was expected to be above average for the Christmas week shows, although our only reports at press time were Toronto drawing about 7,000 and Saginaw, Michigan drawing in the low 2,000s on December 26th. The Toronto show had all three title matches, Ramon Michaels, Steiner's Quebecers and Undertaker Yokozuna, and with heels getting DQ'd to save their titles, which I presume will be consistent for the rest of the weekend. December 20th Monday Night Raw did a 3.0 rating, while All American did a 2.0 and Mania a 1.6. Tatanka vs. Ludwig Borga was added to the Royal Rumble undercard. Kwang the Ninja, who may be Tasmaniac although I'm not certain of that, was introduced in a 10-second clip. A Current Affair did a segment on the McMahon indictments on December 27th that will be repeated on the Current Affair Extra show that airs on January 1st. Medusa also debuted as Alundra Blaze, pretty much doing an American Gladiator's woman knockoff rather than a Tanderole as her ring costume. Design and hairstyle is pretty well a clone of the Gladiator women sans the steroids. The match was treated as serious athletics, which was good, but the crowd seemed to want to react as if we're Tanda, so if this style is going to make it, it's going to take a lot of patience to reprogram the audience. It's clear they are going to attempt to give a women's division headed by Blaze a push. WCW. Barry Windham was mentioned prominently on television, so he may be coming back, although nobody has actually said that yet. The December 25th show in Denver drew 3,000 fans, which would be one of WCW's biggest house shows of the year. However, the show was largely a disaster with the exception of an excellent Pillman vs. Austin match. Nasty Boys, presumably because of Sag's injury, no-showed without any announcement or explanation, leaving hometown hero Scorpio, who got a lot of major media press leading up to the show and was the most popular wrestler on the show, and Bagwell instead to face Harlem Heat. The Flair-Rude match only went 9 minutes, which made people even more unhappy when they were doing 15-minute prelim matches, ending in a DQ when Vader interfered, ringing out Sting, and they did a four-way with Vader splashing Sting in the ref counting 1, 2, 3 in 45 seconds, which infuriated everyone since that was billed as a WCW title match and the main event. The four continued to brawl with Vader, Sting and Flair going over the top rope, and then guys started coming out for the Battle Royal and it was announced Vader, Sting and Flair had gone over the top and were eliminated, even though the other wrestlers hadn't even shown up. Some guys came in as late as 5 minutes and 7 minutes after the match had started, and it came down to Rude and Scorpio, with Rude winning, which only infuriated the fans even more. It was another example of having a chance to draw and having some interest in a city they haven't run in years, and in one show bringing it back down to WCW normal business. WCW Saturday Night on December 18th did a 2.5 rating, while Main Event did a 2.0 and Power Hour a 1.4. Expect the new commissioner to be Nick Bockwinkel. The WCW flashing high-tech interviews in the new events center are annoying rather than effective.